Hello everyone, welcome to Toxiscandia, stories of a toxicologist living in Scandinavia. My name is Sveta and today we are going to talk about a very hot topic, endocrine disruptors. Some of you probably know something about endocrine disruptors, most of you probably don't know anything. And today I'm going to tell you why endocrine disruptors are problematic from the toxicological point of view, how do we interact with endocrine disruptors in daily life, what consequences this interaction may pose for us, for our health, and what can we do to protect ourselves, if we can do anything. If you are interested in this hot topic, please continue watching. Everyone is talking about endocrine disruptors in toxicology for maybe last 20 years, and now it's a very hot topic, as I already said twice, I guess. But before it came to our knowledge, it wasn't that known that any substances can interact with us in this way. So what are endocrine disruptors? Endocrine disruptors are exogenic substances that can affect hormonal system and lead to adverse effects in our hormonal system. Exogenic substances, of course, meaning substances coming from outside of our body that are in our environment, and any substance that can, in theory, interact with our hormonal system, even if it doesn't cause adverse effect right away, still is considered endocrine disruptor, because hormonal system is a very well tuned, a very complex system that can be disturbed even with small interactions. But I will talk about this later a little bit more. It is crucial when we are identifying substances as endocrine disruptors to know what mechanism is working there. So if we know that substance is reacting with us, with our body, and we know that person has some symptoms related to their hormonal system, it wouldn't necessarily mean that this substance causes these symptoms. Of course, there has to be a mechanism. This is a crucial part of definition of endocrine disruptor. So we have to know what mechanism on molecular or cellular level is causing these symptoms, at least in theory. And best option would be to know, of course, in practice, to see it in cells or in animals, in laboratory animals, or even maybe in humans if we have such data. Where can we see, where can we interact with endocrine disruptors? Basically everywhere. Maybe some of you would think of food or medicines, because we all have heard something about hormones used in meat or in dairy products. And of course medicines often contain hormones because they are prescribed for hormonal dysfunctions, for example. But both are not that problematic, because food is very well controlled, at least in Europe, and it is becoming more and more controlled in terms of hormones, even in places where hormones were used widely before. Now governments start to prohibit using hormones as a growth factor and start to restrict this use, more or less. So this area is not the main source, I would say. Medicines are, of course, affecting our hormonal system if they are used for that, but of course people that are using these medicines are aware of that, and it is all done under surveillance of the doctor, so it's not something that happens without our knowledge. But the worst route is, of course, environment around us, and endocrine disruptors can be everywhere, can be in drinking water, can be in different products that we use, and of course it's all not good, because sometimes we're completely unaware of endocrine disruptors interacting with our body. I'll start with some examples. Maybe some of you heard of bisphenol A. This is a very popular, very well-known endocrine disruptor, and it is a substance used in plastics, in plastic production, so it can be an ingredient in plastics, and it has been banned for childhood childhood products now in European Union. So in plastic products for kids at least, there won't be bisphenol A, but in other types of plastics this can still happen. There are also endocrine disruptors in industrial contaminants. This is something that on individual level we cannot influence, but this is something that government try to control. Industries that are using chemicals that can interact with our hormonal system. Of course, all these industries contaminate environment in some way, and if these contaminants get into soil, into drinking water, then it can get into our food, in vegetables, fruits, and then it can get into our body. Another source of endocrine disruptors is pesticides. Pesticides are meant to kill living organisms, insects, and of course we are different from insects, but still we are also living organisms, we humans. So this means that pesticides often have adverse effects on humans as well. These effects are often neurological, but also endocrine system effects, and these pesticides that are widely used everywhere can be endocrine disrupting. We are talking about endocrine system, but I need to specify what it is, because some maybe have a little bit different definitions of endocrine system. These systems of our body run by hormones, and it's not only these classical organs that we think about when we say endocrine system. All the organs that excrete hormones can be considered endocrine system. For example, reproductive organs, thyroid, of course, these are classical endocrine organs, pancreas, but also kidneys, brain, even skin. Basically, all systems in our body are, in wide definition, are included into endocrine system. So this is the scary thing. Hormones are substances that are needed for our different mechanisms in the body to function, and the important thing is that hormones are only needed in very small doses. So this is very well tuned system. So even small dose of exogenic substance coming from outside of our body can disrupt hormonal functions. And another thing that is super important when we are talking about endocrine system are sensitive windows of development, because endocrine system and other systems in our body become developed at some point, and then it's not that critical if something from outside disrupts it. Of course, if the dose is huge, then we can get very serious adverse effects, but the situation is much worse if we're talking about fetuses or kids, because child's brain is still developing in the childhood, and fetuses, of course, are developing other systems in their bodies as well. So the consequences of this hormonal disruption are much more drastic in this windows of development, and hormones, just to be specific, are very much involved in brain development, and if this process is disrupted in any way, it can lead to all kinds of very serious consequences. How do endocrine disruptors work? How do they interact with our bodies? There are several potential systems, mechanisms that can be involved in this process. First two are stimulation or, on the contrary, inhibition of hormonal systems. So these exogenic substances can just directly stimulate production of hormones or prevent production of certain hormones in our body. But there is also a third mechanism, which is mimicking natural hormones, which is much more tricky, because in this case the substance often structurally reminds the body of its natural hormones and is capable of interacting with receptors that are meant for natural hormones. So this would lead to overstimulating these receptors, even breaking them, and then there can be all kind of adverse effects in the end. What kind of consequences are we talking about? Of course, very wide range of different adverse effects. First of all, of course, metabolic disorders such as diabetes, obesity. These are classical effects of endocrine disruption. Thyroid disorders is also very common consequence. Also hormone-dependent cancers. These are probably not that much talked about, but when we are talking about breast, thyroid or testicular cancer, these are cancers that are much influenced by our hormonal system, so all endocrine disruptors can raise the risk of these cancers. Nervous system development in kids, I already touched upon this subject when I talked about sensitive windows of development, and here a great example is an experiment that unfortunately took place somewhere in Latin America, and it was not intentional, of course. There was a plant that produced pesticides, and there were two villages divided by a mountain. So a plant was on one side of the mountain and village was nearby, and on the other side of the mountain there was another village, and the population of these villages were more or less genetically similar. And those who were living very close to pesticide plant, they of course had much more exposure to these pesticides than those who were separated by the mountain. And then in the study they compared the drawings of kids of certain age from both villages, and the difference was dramatic. And if you look at this picture that I'm showing you now, of course on one side you can see maybe not very much a piece of art, but still something that is natural for kids of this age. On the other side, on the contrary, you can see something that is not looking good for this age. So here you can see the difference in brain development on paper. And of course reproductive system disorders, all kind of disorders in men and women. Can be early puberty, it can be endometriosis, PCOS, low sperm quality, fertility problems, and any kind of problems related to reproductive function. Why is it so hard to identify endocrine disruptors? Why is it so hard to find them and ban them? There are several reasons for that. Because first of all, symptoms do not appear right away. It may take many years, many decades before symptoms appear, so it is hard to make this link. And sometimes it even has to be the next generation that experience these symptoms. Mechanisms are very complex and unclear. It's not very easy to find the exact mechanism that is connecting exposure and consequences and adverse effects. Often only epidemiological data can be used to see the effect, and we don't really know the mechanism. We can only suppose that this mechanism is working there, so this is another challenge. Another reason is that very low doses are sufficient to cause adverse effects, and even if the dose is very small, it can be even under a detection limit for some equipment, still it can affect hormonal system, and then there will be an effect, and we would not even be aware of that because the dose is that small, so we wouldn't even suspect this substance. And the last reason is that adverse effect can be very small. It can be, for instance, IQ lowered by 1 point, which is basically nothing. But if we are combining all the substances that we are exposed to, then the effect can be much bigger in the end. So this is why to detect a specific substance can be quite tricky, but effect can be still quite serious. Are there any good news in this subject? Of course there are, fortunately for us. And first of all, there are already many substances that are identified as endocrine disruptors and banned in some areas or even at all. I already mentioned bisphenol A that is banned in childhood products now. Another example, which is not fortunate for those who suffered from these effects, but is good for us because we can now just stop using this substance, is diethylstilbestrol that was used around 50 years ago for preserving pregnancies. It was believed that this medicine will help women to carry up to their term. And then in girls that were born from these mothers, there was a very specific type of vaginal cancer that was super frequent, so the risk was much higher for those girls than for general population. So then the endocrine disrupting mechanism was identified and adverse effects were seen, and now we are lucky enough not to use this medicine anymore. Another good news is that pesticide surveillance is quite strict nowadays, so companies have to comply with different kind of restrictions, and this is very positive for us because pesticides are quite serious sources of exposure to endocrine disruptors. And if before, I think in 50s, 60s, maybe even 70s, DDT was used as insecticide. It was actually the reason why malaria disappeared from Southern Europe, although it was there before, because malaria carrying mosquitoes were killed with DDT. But DDT is very potent endocrine disruptor. It has also other negative effects on human health. It's also very persistent in the environment. It is still present in there, but we don't use it anymore, so we don't add to DDT that is already there. So now we are not exposed to that much DDT as before, and effects are thus smaller. What can we do as individuals to protect ourselves? There is unfortunately not much to do, but there is still something. Of course, living in eco-friendly areas is important, and those people who move from big industries, big cities away to the countryside, they are doing something right. On other hand, using pesticides on your farm there, it's not a good idea, but you can always control that, at least while growing your own fruits and vegetables, which is a good idea here, because in store-bought products, pesticide level can be quite high if you don't trust the supplier, for instance, and growing your own produce might be a good solution here if it's possible for you. If there are any symptoms already, such as diabetes, obesity, thyroid disorders, of course regular doctor checkups are crucial here, because it's important to maintain these diseases, not to let them develop to some very drastic consequences. And a last piece of advice that I could give you here is to be aware that not all the diseases are something that people cause themselves, such as obesity, for instance, or even diabetes. These patients often are blamed for their diseases, but as I said, it's very complex system, very complex disease that can be affected also by endocrine disruptors. So I hope you are not one blaming people for eating too much or any other nonsense, but if you are, just remember that from toxicological point of view, endocrine disruptors are a very important factor in these diseases. So it's not something that we can control in many cases. Not a very positive video, but I think it's better to be aware of these things than to stay in the dark, and then if something comes out of the blue, and if you know that this problem exists, it would be easier for you to make some decisions, such as buying eco-friendly vegetables or even moving somewhere, which I would suggest if you are really concerned. And I hope that you like this video. If it's so, just hit the like button and notification button if you want to get notifications about my future videos. In any case, I hope you stay strong and healthy, and see you next time. Bye bye.